The idea that Olen would look at him with victory and say, "I didn't tell you," didn't bother him at the time. The idea that Olen was the reason for all this and that he poisoned the room with gas and that he was hallucinating was a complete mind blow. The room was behind all that was happening, the room we saw. He was reaching his hand towards the large black phone in the office, a copy of the phone next to the bed in the bedroom, but his hand was not reaching fast. It was moving very slowly, as if he were diving underwater, to the point that he was afraid he would start seeing the air around him. He raised the speaker very slowly, while his other hand was moving very slowly, and was dialing the number 0 on the phone. While his hand was pointing to the speaker, he heard the phone ringing, and was going back to his place after dialing the number. The sound was like the sound of a racing car in a racing show. "Be careful, dear racer. If you don't know how to answer the question, you'll be left on the road to hell." He didn't hear the ringing of the phone in his ear. He only heard a rough sound and started talking. "This is the 9th. The 9th, this is the 9th, the 9th, and this is the 10th, the 10th. We killed all your friends are now dead. The 6th. The horror increased and Mike heard, not because of the words the voice was repeating, but because of the hollow look of the voice he was speaking to. It wasn't a machine voice, but it wasn't a human voice either. That was the sound of the room. The thing that lives in the room is leaking from the walls and the floor and is speaking from the phone. Something that has nothing to do or looks like any other experience I've had before. Something from another world. Something that hasn't arrived yet, but it's getting closer. Something very hungry. Where is dinner? Mike turned around. The phone's ringing and the wind was moving like a dandelion, like his stomach in his stomach. He was still hearing the sound out of the darkness. 18. It's 18 now. Take a breath when the alarm goes off. 4. It's 4 now. He wasn't aware that he was now putting his hand behind his ear and putting it in his mouth. He didn't feel that he was taking out a cigarette from his pocket, but the alarm went off and he decided to smoke. The room was starting to melt in front of him. The corners of the room were moving. They were turning into sharp, chaotic holes that looked painful to his eyes. The big canopy in the middle of the ceiling was shaking like a thick mass of slime. The photos were bending. In the photo next to the bedroom door, the woman started running up the stairs in a nervous movement, as if she was in a silent movie. The sound from the phone was like the sound of an electric saw teaching him to speak. 18. It's 8 now. The bedroom door and the main door were collapsing. They were expanding, as if they were turning the entrance into a tunnel through another world. The light was changing. The brightness was increasing, the temperature was rising, the orange and yellow colors were filling the place. He saw that the wallpapers were cracking. The floor of the room was shaking, and he could hear his voice. The room was in 1408. He was getting closer. The man who lived inside the walls had a strange voice. 6. This is 6. Yes, this is 6. He looked at the cable car that had been taken from the cellar, the old hotel door, the old cars, and the words on the cable car's roof. He closed the roof before the explosion without thinking. Mike, a man who couldn't think, smelled the cabriolet's smoke and lit it up at the same moment the cigarette fell from his mouth. He brought the smoke from the cabriolet's cabinet and lit them all up at the same time, with a loud, distinct sound. The moment he smelled the strong smell of the cabriolet, he went from his nose to his brain and was overwhelmed for a moment. Second, without thinking, he took off his cheap shirt, made in Korea or Cambodia. The stain immediately appeared on the old shirt and began to rise in front of his eyes. The room's image was distorted. Mike saw everything in front of him with a sudden awareness, like someone who was sleeping out of a nightmare, to be surprised that he was in a bigger nightmare. His thinking was clear at that moment, maybe because of the smell of the cabriolet or the sudden heat in his shirt. The word devil was distorted and strange, not even describing part of the scene. He was in a cave, in the middle of a desert full of tunnels and tunnels. The bedroom door turned into the burial room door in a cemetery. To his left, in the place where the image of the silent nature was hanging, the wall was sloping in his direction, filling the long cracks and gaps that opened up to another world. Passing through it now in the direction of something, Mike heard his breath and smelled a strange smell, as if it was the smell of the lion's den. His mind was cut off by the flame that began to burn his son's blood. The fire rose in front of his eyes and shook the whole world. While he began to smell the special smell of his hair burning, Mike left the room again in the direction of the door. The sound of a million insects in the wall and the yellow-orange light increased the intensity of the flame all the time. But this time, when he reached the door and turned the corner, the door opened. As if the thing that inhabited this room had lost its interest in a burning person, or as if it was not very interested in the grilled meat. There is a famous song that says that love can make the world spin, and that chance is often greater than love in real changes in the world. Rufus Durbin lived in the room 1414. The room was near the elevator. He was a salesman for a sewing machine. He came to New York to apply for a job in an executive position. About 90 years ago, when he first came down to the room in 1408, he jumped out of the window and another one, a salesman for a sewing machine, saved the room. Maybe this is exaggeration. Maybe Mike Insulin would have lived like this even if no one was present in the hallway of the hotel at that time. The fire that catches your shirt is not a simple thing, and it was probably going to be much worse if Durbin had not thought fast and moved faster. Although Durbin did not exactly remember what happened, he was able to make up a story that he would tell the journalists and in front of the TV cameras. He was happy with the idea of showing up in the hero's picture. This would surely help him get the job he came for. He clearly thought he saw someone holding fire running down the hallway of the hotel. Any further details were totally confused. It was impossible to remember the details precisely. Was completely confused. It was impossible to remember the details. The only thing he didn't tell any journalist, because it was strange, was that the man's screams were heard all the time. As if someone was raising his voice from a stereo, it was right in front of him. The sound of the scream didn't change, but the sound was changing, as if a high-pitched sound was coming closer all the time. Darburn was running on the road holding a bag full of snow. His shirt was burning. I noticed it immediately. That's what he told the journalist. He was running until he hit the door of the room in front of him and fell on his knees on the floor. That's the moment when Darburn reached it. He put his foot on the shoulder of the man, screaming. He hit the carpet of the hotel's floor and took the contents of the bag he brought from the snow machine in the hotel. The details of these memories are vivid in his mind. He noticed that the light of the fire from the shirt was much bigger than usual. An orange light, yellow, strange. He thought about a trip he and his brother went to Australia for years, the amazing Australian desert, the giant rocks, the unimaginable temperature. The light on the man's face was like the sunset light on their faces in the desert at the time. It was like the light on his face was coming from somewhere else. He fell on his knees on the floor next to the man, who was no longer very burning. The man was covered with ice cubes. They pushed him to turn him over to put out the flames of the fire, which was still attached to the shirt. The man's skin on the left side of his neck had turned red. The edges of his chest melted and deformed, but in contrast, Darburn looked up at the room the man had come from. Madness, something incomprehensible. The light came from behind the room's door, the same colors that Darburn had imagined from his trip, the yellow-hot light of the deserted desert. Except for this terrifying light, he heard a voice as if he were talking to someone dear, outside the door. For a moment, he felt like he wanted to open the door, to go in and see what was behind it. Maybe Mike also saved Darburn's life. He was aware that Darburn was standing next to him, as if he suddenly lost his attention. He saw the terrifying light coming from the room's door reflected on Darburn's face. Mike thought these details very well, unlike Darburn. The room is quiet, as if Mike's words were a sedative. The room's door was closed in 1408, and the light was cut off. The terrifying light was cut off, which sounded like incomprehensible words. As soon as the light went out, Darburn's tailor was heading towards the elevator door, and he rang the fire alarm. There is a picture of Mike Enslin in his book, The Treatment of Burn Victims, A Personal Approach. The 16th edition of the book is 16 months after Mike's quick stay in the room 1408. The picture is not obvious, only a part of it. But it is Mike's picture. Anyone who sees the picture will be able to distinguish it by the white square next to his left chest. The meat around this square is red, burning from the second degree in more than one place. The white square indicates the place where the shirt he was wearing that night was, the lucky tree shirt, and the pocket where the tape recorder was. The tape recorder was out of order, but it was still working. The tape was intact inside. The tape was the one that was not intact. After Mike's lawyer heard the tape 3 or 4 times, he threw it in a safe in his office and refused to admit the poems he had written on his shoulders. The tape remained in the safe since then. Mike's lawyer never felt any desire to listen to the tape again, or even to listen to a curious friend. Some of his curious friends were ready to commit a murder to let them listen to the tape. The cultural environment in New York is small, and words are quickly transferred. He was not comfortable with the sound of Mike on the tape. He was not comfortable with the recorded words. My brother died. A wolf ate him in the winter on the highway. What does this crazy word mean? Most importantly, he was not comfortable at all with the sounds on the tape. The sound was as if liquid was sticking, as if fabric was moving, and sometimes the sounds were as if they were not electric, and sometimes, strangely, as if a voice was speaking. While Mike was in the hospital, a man named Olin called Farrell and asked him to listen to the tape. Farrell refused. Olin left the lawyer's office, and he praises God all the way that Mike did not sue him or the hotel for neglecting the right to leave. I tried to convince him not to go in. I tried to convince him. If anyone could be accused of neglecting tonight, Mr. Farrell, it would be Mr. Inslen personally. He did not believe in anything. He was unwise and unsafe. I think he will change his mind now. Although Farrell hated the tape, he wanted Mike to listen to it. It might be a source of inspiration for a new book. There is a good plot in what happened to Mike. Farrell knew this. It is not a chapter in a book, but a whole book. His sales could surpass all Mike's books. Of course, he was not convinced by Mike's words that he would not only stop writing about ghosts, but would stop writing at all. That is all there is to it. This is what makes a writer a writer. As for Mike Inslen, he was lucky in spite of everything. He knew this. He could have gotten burned worse. He did not have Mr. Durbin and his ice bucket. He could have had to undergo 30 or 40 surgeries instead of just 4. Despite the surgeries, the scar remained on his left neck. The doctor told him that the scar would hurt over time. Although the burns were painful for weeks and months after he left the hotel, he understood well that it was necessary. If not for the ice bucket, he would have died in the room in 1408 like everyone else. The medical profession would often say that it was a heart attack or a mistake, but the reason would have been much more severe and cruel. No, this is easier. He was also lucky because he wrote 3 books about places he lived in before visiting a place he really lived in. His lawyer may not be convinced that he stopped writing, but it does not matter. Mike was convinced of this by the prosecutor. He could not even write a postcard without feeling dizzy and dizzy. Sometimes, just looking at a pen or a recorder made him think. The pictures on the walls. The pictures on the walls. I tried to fix them. He did not know what that meant. He did not remember the pictures. He did not remember most of the details of the room. He was happy with that. Forgetfulness is a mercy. His blood pressure was not good these days. The doctor told him that this happens sometimes to burn victims. He wrote a treatment. What does it mean that there are problems? The eye doctor wrote him a treatment. Permanent problems in the back, swelling in the prostate. He was happy with all these problems. He knew that he was not the first person to escape from room 1408, but he did not escape completely. He tried to be careful. His only mercy is that he does not remember the details. Sometimes nightmares visit him. In fact, a lot of them visit him every night, but he rarely remembers them when he wakes up. The feeling that things are floating in the corners of the place melts in the same way that the records are melted. When the weather is pleasant, sometimes he walks on the sea. The most time he remembers anything from the 70 minutes he spent in room 1408 was while walking on these. He was not a human being. He was not a human being at all. He said to himself as if he were facing the sea. The ghosts. The ghosts were human, at least in some days. But the things that were living in the walls of this room. Maybe the situation will improve over time. He hopes that the situation will really improve. And maybe over time all these memories will disappear, as the melting on his neck disappears. But now he only sleeps when the light shines on his bedroom. Because when he wakes up from the nightmare while he is asleep, he can know where he is. He removes all the phones from the house. And it seems that in the deepest point of his mind, he is afraid that the phone will ring once, and he will pick up the phone and hear a scary voice saying, wake up now, we killed all your friends. All your friends are dead now." And when the sun is shining on the sunset, it covers all the windows of the house. He sits in the darkness and waits for his time. To make sure that the sun has completely disappeared, he can no longer bear the light of the sun at sunset, the yellowish-orange light, like the sunset light in the desert. We present it to you, Room 1408, Stephen King's story.